What's up, guys? It's Joe, and we're back again, this time for week 8, and I'm joined as always by Luke. We do have a special surprise coming up, so stay tuned for that. But it would be remiss of me to not mention our sponsor, Underdog. Make sure to use code ANALYST. They're going to match your first deposit up to $100. We posted some more of our pick'ems last night. Some of them hit, some of them didn't, but for the most part, it was a pretty good week. So definitely check that out. Luke, surprise this week. This is my cousin-in-law. His name's Kyle. He is known for being very passionate. He's a Tennessee Titans fan, and we've decided each week we're going to have him come on, and we're going to give him like 2 minutes, and he's just going to do what he does. You'll see exactly what I mean when I say that. So, Kyle, welcome to Kyle's Rage Run. The stage is yours.
Well, thank you, Joey. I appreciate you. Everybody out there in ESPN land, WFA land, I don't care. Any sports coverage of any type, Pat McAfee, I don't care. Stop talking about Derrick Henry getting traded, okay? Because nobody is giving the Titans a good enough a package, all right, that is going to make us happy. All right, plain and simple. The guy is still a top 5 running back based on Pro Football Focus, okay? He's still the king at 29, all right? I don't want to hear it anymore. If you're not giving me a first and a third round pick for Derrick Henry, don't come to my front door. I don't want to hear it anymore, all right? Jeez. Everybody going all gaga. Oh, wouldn't you love to see Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry? Oh, that would be so great. Jerking off. I don't care. I'm tired of it. I don't want to hear it anymore. It's not going to make me happy. I don't give a damn about Lamar Jackson. Tyjae Spears is out snapping Derrick Henry half of the games this year, all right? And it's so damn predictable. The guy's seeing 9-man boxes, and he's still putting up yards. The only thing that the Tennessee Titans have, and you want to trade him for what? A third-round pick and then tell us to be happy about it? Go screw. Tired of it. Here, what? Great idea. Hey, Chiefs fans, go trade Travis Kelce for a third-round pick. How great is that? How great is that? Go punch yourself in the dick and tell me how that feels. Jesus Christ almighty. And then, I'm sorry, but if he goes to, like, Baltimore, yeah, like, obviously he's going to be the lead back in front of Gus Edwards and Justice Hill, but they're still there. It's going to be a committee. Because then everybody is going to rely on Derrick Henry in the short yard situation. I feel that there are going to be other teams that don't know how to use them. Like, I'm not going to lie, even the Titans aren't using them right now. But you know what? Oh, I'm going to have a heart attack, guys. I can't do this anymore. I can't. My team is just doomed to be miserable. And if the Baltimore Ravens get Derrick Henry on some third-round pick trade, guess what? Full send nuclear missile to fucking Baltimore. I'm done. I can't do it anymore. I'm done. I don't care. I don't care about what everybody thinks about Pat Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. I'm tired of this. Fellas, love yous. Your family. Have a great weekend.
Oh, that went exactly how we expected. Yeah. So anyway, I think it was supposed to be a little more fantasy football geared. He kind of worked it in a little bit. But for his first rage run, I think that was pretty good. I think that was pretty reasonable. Okay. Okay. We're gonna move on somehow. We're gonna move on to the Thursday night game yesterday, and that's how the series works. By that, we don't, Thank you, Kyle. Acknowledge. Move on. That was great. Last night, Thursday night football, the Buffalo Bills took on Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Tampa Bay side of the ball looks like they were about to catch up at the end of this game. Chris Godwin was like the best first half receiver you could have hoped for in this game. Totally disappeared in the second half. Mike Evans kind of came alive a little bit with that touchdown, but for the most part was not really utilized that much. Rachaad White had one of his better games this season. On the Buffalo Bills side of the football, Luke, do you remember the tweet that we put out talking about a specific wide receiver for the Buffalo Bills? I'm going to have my reach. No, I'm kidding. Khalil Shakir. I put out a tweet right before, right after waivers this week, talking about Khalil Shakir and how Dawson Knox being out is going to impact this team in a couple different ways. One, Dalton Kincaid had a career game. He had a touchdown. He had a great game after having a great game last week. But wide receiver Khalil Shakir, he played. He had a season high in targets the week prior in week 7, and he also had 20 routes run. This week, he was heavily involved. He had, 9 catches? I didn't even see. But he had a great game. If you guys did not get the chance to pick up Khalil Shakir, this is probably going to be one of the most popular names this week. Luke, what do we make of this running back situation in Buffalo? Stephon Diggs, is this at the point where Josh Allen's going to start spreading the ball a little more? Because it's great that he actually has more weapons like Dalton Kincaid and Khalil Shakir. But are you worried about Stephon Diggs, and are you worried about James Cook?
I do think ultimately Stephon Diggs is the guy. I'm not really too concerned about it. And I mean, he still had over 10 targets in this game. So nothing to be concerned about there. James Cook, I do think there is something to be concerned about. And now we're turning this into some sort of internet narrative where I'm seeing on Twitter, like Latavius Murray gets stopped short of the goal line and Twitter is panning to James Cook looking angry on the sideline. So usually once the internet gets involved, there's something to say about it. I'm not overly optimistic that James Cook will be able to get right, especially with this, for some reason, less usage that he's seeing. I mean, I think the Bills' offense looked great with him out there on the field for 80%, 70% of the snaps earlier in the year. I don't really know why they've taken a load off of him, but we'll have to wait and see. I'm definitely concerned that this is what we're going to see in the future. And if it is, James Cook's downgraded from a high-end RB2 to more of a weekly flex play, if that.
Yeah, and the problem really comes with kind of, as you mentioned, like that touchdown upside not being there. And that pass catching upside not being there, because it seems like he's turning into one of those running backs where it's like you get 15 carries for 80 yards, but like in the world of fantasy football where you're not benefiting from those carries, like that alone doesn't give him value. Luckily, we're in a league where I think it's 0.3 per rush that we have for the running backs in there, which might be a little excessive, but for the most part, I think there should be some sort of compensation for rushing the ball. Maybe like 0.1 per rush. I don't know, something like that. Don't shoot the messenger. I'm just here. But all in all, kind of a messy game from the Buccaneers side of the ball for most of that game. They kept pinning Baker Mayfield in like the 5, which, great for that. I forget the name of the Buffalo punter, but he was having a fantastic game. Makes me want to add punters in fantasy. Not really. But yeah, so that's how last night's game went. I assume Khalil Shakir is going to be among the popular waiver wire names this week. So moving on, we got some of our bigger games this week. Panthers versus Texans. I said bigger game, then I said Panthers and Texans. That's a mistake on my part. Panthers have allowed every quarterback against them to throw for at least 2 touchdowns. They get CJ Stroud this week, who's been having a fantastic season. Tank Dell officially back this week. Is it a Nico Collins week? Is it a Tank Dell week? I'm not sure. I don't care. I'm probably starting both of those guys if I have them, just because. Luke, what's your situation on this backfield? If you are a Dameon Pierce owner, on paper, this is a great matchup against the Panthers, one of the worst teams against running backs. But Pierce played 33% of the snaps last week. The last week they played before the bye, and Singletary played about 54% of the snaps. So is this a changing of the guard? Is this a 1 week kind of issue? What are your thoughts?
I don't know if I can make a definitive statement on that yet, but I can make a definitive statement on what my plans are for this week. And I am not touching Dameon Pierce this week at all. This is in theory, a good matchup for a running back, but I just don't trust it. I mean, I'm not starting a running back that gets 33% of the snaps. It's not going to happen. I don't really want to start Devin Singletary either, but I think out of the two, he might actually be the better start by now.
Yeah, I can see that. And another guy on this team too is Dalton Schultz, who was kind of one of your fantasy darlings going into the season. A little bit of a slow start, but a touchdown in each of the last 3 weeks he's played. You just mentioned that CJ Stroud, every quarterback against the Panthers has at least 2 touchdowns passing. Do we think Dalton Schultz continues his streak in this game? And although we can't predict touchdowns, one of the things we mentioned on Dalton Schultz is that, the offensive linemen were hurt early on. And we're kind of seeing that with how I mentioned Seattle's situation last week, to where they were using Jake Bobo over JSN, and they were having their tight ends on the field more. So it was only 2 wide receivers in the field instead of 3, blah, blah, blah. All that worked out, and JSN had a great game. But that being said, the same situation is happening with the Texans, where, Dalton Schultz had to block early on, but now he's in a position where he's actually contributing on a weekly basis. So, Luke, talk to me a little bit about your expectations on Dalton Schultz and how you see him going forward.
Yeah, as you said, he was one of my favorites coming into this season. I drafted him in almost all of my leagues just as a late round tight end guy. Pretty mediocre to my expectations so far, but as I said, he was drafted as that guy who isn't really going to be your, high end tight end one. But if you miss out on the Wallers and the Kittles and the Hawkinsons in your draft, Schultz was the guy I was going to virtually every single time. And now we're starting to see why. He is that established guy in this offense. Rookie quarterbacks, something about rookie quarterbacks and tight ends, they just like throwing to their tight ends a lot. That's another added bonus. And I think the beginning of the year, as you said, the offensive line was hurt. We saw Robert Woods really being the veteran guy in that receiver room. But now that Schultz isn't blocking as much, he is starting to develop into that role. I think he's a low-end tight end 1 for the rest of the season. And I think he's definitely worth rostering, if not starting on some teams.
Yeah, and one thing we always talk about too is how bad the tight end landscape is. And one of my favorite strategies, as I think you've seen, and I think even Kyle, if only he was here, has seen, is that I like to kind of stash tight ends on my bench and then use them in trade packages once they start to do well for better players. So that's been one of my favorite strategies to do. I do that in most of the leagues I'm in. I've managed to move Jake Ferguson, Dalton Schultz, stuff like that. So definitely worth your time to stash them at least on your bench, even if it's a bigger league, because teams are going to be in need of those tight ends. On the flip side of the football, Carolina Panthers, Miles Sanders practiced in full. He's been banged up the weeks prior. Is he going to take back control of this offense, or does this now belong to Chuba Hubbard? And at the same time, this wide receiver room, Adam Thielen is looking like a top 3 wide receiver right now as far as fantasy football goes. Do we see that continuing? Because it seems like there's a change of the guard when it comes to calling plays as well. Thomas Brown is going to take over as the play caller after the bye. I believe it was Frank Reich calling the plays prior to that. If he's smart, he's just going to do what they've been doing and just force the ball to Adam Thielen. Maybe not too smart. They haven't, obviously, they're 0 whatever at this point. But Luke, what changes do you expect from this Panthers offense? And if you have Miles Sanders, similar to Dameon Pierce, what are you doing with that situation?
This one, I feel more confident in saying that we have a little bit of a changing of the guard. I don't think Miles Sanders is going to be eliminated from the offense, but I'd probably guess that we're going to have probably the Sanders role at the beginning of the year is now the Hubbard role, and the Hubbard role at the beginning of the year is now the Sanders role. They probably flip-flopped a little bit. I'd expect Hubbard to see probably about, like a 60-40 split, and that makes him the running back to have on this offense. This offense isn't very good, so I don't know if that means much to fantasy owners, but I think he's the guy you want. And as for Adam Thielen, you said it. Just keep feeding him. He's producing with what he's getting.
At his age, that's a good thing. All right, moving on. We got Cowboys versus Rams. So Cowboys side of the football, not really too much to report on here. Dak had one of his better games before the bye. Rams haven't been all that great on defense. They still got Aaron Donald, but they got some Swiss cheese back in that secondary. So Dak has a chance to kind of continue that good streak. CD Lamb had one of his better games too. Jake Ferguson's in a good spot. Tony Pollard, we saw him last week. Thankfully, he ripped off that one catch and run, so that kind of worked out for his value. So Cowboys side of the ball, there's not really too much to report. But Rams side of the football, Darrell Henderson came in last week. He looked pretty good in pass protection. He played 57% of the snaps. He had 19 touches. Do we expect him to be the back that Sean McVay is going to feed going forward? And if so, are you starting him this week, even against Dallas?
I do think he's going to be the one who sees the majority of the snaps. I don't think I'm starting him, however, against Dallas or really against anybody. I find it weird that, they have 4 or 5 bodies that they could use in this backfield right now. I don't feel particularly confident in any of them or the Rams blocking. I think this offense is really just Stafford throwing to Kupp and Puka at this point. And something I've seen is the internet talking about, take this for what it's worth, but everyone's saying, oh, Darrell Henderson was reverted back to the practice squad. He's not going to be the guy. I don't understand that sort of messaging. I mean, we see this all the time. Players, they get sent back down to the practice squad if they're going to be held there. I think it's pretty safe to assume that Henderson's going to lead the team in snaps if he led them this week, coming off his couch and led them in snaps. Now that he's been practicing with them, I think he's going to continue to be the guy, but that only goes so far. I mean, again, you have so many guys back there, and this is the Rams offense. There's just other playmakers, other ways I'm looking before I look towards Darrell Henderson.
Yeah, and another thing too, quickly on that note, is one thing we talked about was that with Cooper Kupp's return, the Rams running backs have been essentially non-existent in the passing game. They had about a 15% target share with Cooper Kupp being out, but with Cooper Kupp being back into the game, they have about a 5% target share. And that's, again, being split between Darrell Henderson and Royce Freeman last week. So that's like 2 targets being split between 2 different guys. The receiving upside is just not there. The touchdown saved Darrell Henderson last week. May not be as easy of a feat this week against the Cowboys. Rams receivers are averaging Rams receivers being Puka and Cooper Kupp combining for about 70% of the team's targets every single week ever since Cooper Kupp's return. So those are the only 2 players in this offense that you can confidently start. And also on that practice squad note, that's a normal, move at this point. I think teams have 3 chances to bring up a player from the practice squad before they have to sign them to the active roster. So for the Rams, it really just saves them a roster spot because they can have Darrell Henderson on their team and just put him on the practice squad. They do obviously run the risk of, if you put a player on the practice squad, he can be picked up by any other team. I don't think Darrell Henderson poses that kind of threat to where a team would just jump in and take him just because. But so it's just a normal move. We saw a lot of comments on our waiver wire posts about Darrell Henderson. He's on the practice squad. Don't get him. That's just a normal NFL procedure at this point. That's only recently we're allowed to be on practice squad. I think it used to have to be players who were in the league for 3 years or less. To be a veteran, you had to be in the league for over 3 years. So new change, taking advantage of it. I'm sure that'll be changed in the future, but for now, that's how it is. Next game here, we got the Packers versus the Vikings. Packers side of the football, Aaron Jones. We mentioned on our episode with the fantasy doctor, Dr. Niffen, that Aaron Jones' hamstring injury is not going to be an issue that goes away quickly. He's still dealing with it. He's still not looking great. He's not 100%. It's just really hard to trust him going forward. It's a good matchup against the Vikings, but if I have Aaron Jones, if I can afford to, I'm going to put him on the bench because he got outsnapped and outproduced by A.J. Dillon last week. So it's not a risk that I'm happily willing to take. Luke, on the same side of it, Christian Watson, it looked like he might have had a serious injury in the game that he played, but he ended up practicing, and it seems like he's going to be okay for this matchup. It's a good matchup against the Vikings. He didn't play in the fourth quarter because of that injury last week. What are we expecting this week from the Packers pass catchers? Luke Musgrave also in danger of missing this week. Does that open things up for a guy like Christian Watson, who looked like he was starting to hit some chemistry with Jordan Love before the bye?
Yeah, I'm souring pretty quickly on Christian Watson. I tend to do that on these players that are constantly getting hurt, and then the hype comes back. They don't produce. The hype's here again, and he gets hurt again. It's just a cycle that I've heard too many times before, and it just never really feels like it pans out. I'm sure there are exceptions to that rule, and Christian Watson might be one of them, but especially in like redraft leagues, that's not somebody who I'm jumping out of my chair to start this week. I would argue that Romeo Doubs might even be a better start. He has been all year. As you said, Luke Musgrave is out. His production has been increasing and his usage has been increasing. So that does open up some targets for somebody in there. Is it Romeo Doubs? Is it Jaden Reed? is it Tucker Kraft who Matt LaFleur is hyping up in practice now? Again, Christian Watson, the role is going to be there. He's the explosive deep threat. He's their one play magic guy. That's always going to be there. The upside is always going to be there. I know everybody remembers last season when, what did he have, like a 50-yard touchdown every week, it felt like, and it was just single-handedly carrying him in fantasy. I remember he won me a championship. But again, the injuries are starting to freak me out a little bit, and he's not even really producing when he's healthy out there. So definitely lowering my expectations for this week, even in this great matchup against the Vikings secondary.
Yeah, Christian Watson seems like one of those guys, especially this week when there's no teams on a bye. He's the kind of guy where you stash him, and if he has a big game this week, and you see, it's not even just the big game. You want to see healthy snap percentage. You want to see a healthy target share. Like, you want to see a healthy amount of routes run. Like, you want to see this guy actually consistently involved in this offense, because he was drafted by a lot to be the assumed wide receiver one of this offense. And it seems like Jordan Love, who got off to a pretty hot start, it kind of reminds me of like Eli Manning, where it's like first half, you're not getting anything from Jordan Love. Second half, fourth quarter, that's where Jordan Love comes alive. But I think that kind of needs to start happening a little sooner. And if they want that spark, Christian Watson is kind of the guy to give them that spark. So hoping that they start to move in that direction. Flip side of the ball, Minnesota Vikings, Alexander Mattison out-snapped and out-touched by Cam Akers last week. Maybe it's just an off week. Maybe it's a 1 week thing. Another situation where we got to sit back, look at it, and see what happens. Receiver-wise, Jordan Addison had the game of his life, and he's obviously a must-start moving forward as long as Justin Jefferson's out. But one thing I will say is that if you are a Justin Jefferson owner, watch to see if the Vikings win this game, and they got a pretty decent schedule moving forward. If they start to win some more of these games, Justin Jefferson will probably come back sooner than expected. I think kind of the message when Justin Jefferson got hurt would be, okay, is it worth for him to actually come back? Or at this point, is he just going to sit out the rest of the season if the Vikings don't even have a chance at the playoffs? But they're starting to rally. They could win some of these games. They just beat the 49ers. So they're actually in a pretty good spot. And I would imagine, Justin Jefferson went from an immediate sell to see what you can get to, okay, maybe if you want to snag him from the Justin Jefferson owner, he's got a good chance of coming back at this point, and he's actually got something to play for. So moving on, we'll try to skim through this one, save a little time here. Colts versus the Saints. Colts side of the football, Jonathan Taylor. We talked last week about him and Zach Moss and how Taylor was trending up, Moss was trending downward. We were saying, is it going to kind of reach a point where they're both in the middle, or is one going to take over the other? And that's exactly what happened. Jonathan Taylor outproduced Zach Moss. They played pretty even amount of snaps, but Jonathan Taylor outproduced Zach Moss, and that's likely going to be the direction going forward. Zach Moss still get a healthy amount of touches, so I can call him desperate flex play, but Jonathan Taylor is still the guy in this backfield. Receiver-wise, Josh Downs, sorry. Josh Downs coming off a huge game, and I think he's got a good chance of doing that again against the Saints. They kind of like to funnel their passes into that slot. We saw that last week with Christian Kirk. We saw it the week before against the Texans. So I think this is a good spot for Josh Downs to continue his reign. He's got a 21% target share when Gardner Minshew is the quarterback. I think, again, this is a Josh Downs game. We saw Michael Pittman kind of get shut out until the end of the game last week where he had that big touchdown. Downs is the guy. It's seemingly Downs in this offense. Saints side of the football, Alvin Kamara heavily involved in this offense. He's averaging 26 touches per game on the season. That's 4 more than any other running back this season. I don't think me or you expected him to get that kind of pass volume. I don't think anyone, even if you expected high pass volume, I don't think we expected 10 targets a game for a guy like Alvin Kamara, which is absolutely asinine when you have guys like Chris Olave and Michael Thomas. They need to start moving the ball downfield. What are your thoughts on Chris Olave in this matchup? Colts notoriously are giving up a ton of points to opposing wide receiver ones. Do you trust Chris Olave? Are you starting him this week if you have him?
I am, and I wouldn't say that that's indicative of my opinion on the Saints offense going forward. I just think this is a really good matchup. I think it's pretty telling that, Alvin Kamara is getting these 15 target games and the Saints are scoring 10 points and losing. I don't know. It's working from a fantasy perspective for Alvin Kamara owners, but I think this offense looked better when they were airing it out to Olave and throwing the ball 70 yards to Rashid Shaheed every now and then. I don't really like how they've sort of just, put a blanket over their own offense and are dumping the ball off so often. Now, what do you expect? I mean, this is the Saints offense that, had Drew Brees doing this at the end of his career. He couldn't push the ball downfield for those last 3-4 years. You have Derek Carr now. He's not much different. He loves taking what he has in front of him, doesn't do much improvising. It's just looks at what the defense gives him and takes it. So I guess in hindsight, we probably should have seen something like this coming. But I do think this is a great matchup. As you said, the Colts secondary has been getting absolutely torn apart by opposing receivers. This is the time for Chris Olave to show us why he's our wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 on our teams.
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of do or die. And if Michael Thomas comes up and he ends up being the guy, then there might be a changing of the guard going forward. But continuing on here, Dolphins versus Patriots. My poor Patriots came off a pretty good game, beating the Buffalo Bills last week, but it's going to be a harder feat this week. Tyreek Hill, there was some worry in the middle of the week that he may actually be able to come and play for this game, but he was in the locker room and he said he's playing. So the scare for Tyreek Hill has come and gone already. Tyreek Hill will suit up for this matchup. Jalen Waddle, he is also practicing with that back injury, so he's going to play as well. Just want to touch on Raheem Mostert real quick. It seems like he's starting to come back down to earth a little bit. He was splitting the snaps last week with Salvan Ahmed and Jeff Wilson. Just when I expected it to be Raheem Mostert in the game, I saw Ahmed or I saw Jeff Wilson. So it's likely going to be messy going forward until Devon Achane comes back. And when Achane comes back, which, our friend Dr. Nathan mentioned that he does not expect Achane to miss more than the 4 weeks that he has to miss for IR. So if you can still trade for Achane, now is the time. He's going to be a RB1 when he returns. Flip side of the ball, Patriots, not really much to talk about. Stevenson's been doing a little better recently. It seems like the Patriots are trying to get him the ball more target-wise. So that's good, and that's kind of been saving him on each week. But he's still a 10 to 15, if you're lucky, kind of guy. I think the Patriots can play a little better in this matchup. It seems like they're kind of on the uptick right now. Kendrick Bourne, and this is kind of a very loose stat, so take this with a grain of salt. But when the Patriots aren't dog shit, Kendrick Bourne averages about 15 points per game, fantasy-wise. And again, very loose stat. How do you define dog shit games? I mean, it's pretty obvious, but yeah. So Kendrick Bourne, I'd call him a decent flex this week. But again, there's always that chance that Mac Jones in this offense just completely go into the shitter. Zeke getting more touches than I think a good amount of us would like, especially goal line. He's now his touchdowns in back-to-back weeks. So a little messy there. Luke, why don't you kick us off with the Giants and Jets game? This is, a every 4 year kind of occurrence. I know you're a Giants fan. We got a lot of Jets fans in Jersey too, especially ones that I know. So talk to us a little bit about Saquon Barkley. Right now he's got 80. He's playing more snaps than any other running back with 80%. He's second in touches by Kamara. Do you trust him going forward as your running back 1?
I do. First off, this is going to probably be an ugly game. I mean, you've got Jets coming off the bye, playing a Giants defense that's playing hard. They know they have to play some really tough defense in order to have any shot at winning these games with the way the Giants offense looks. And then on the flip side, you have the Giants offense going up against one of the best defenses in the league in the Jets. So this one's going to be pretty ugly. But you mentioned Saquon. He's getting all these touches. He's on the field more than 80% of the game. The usage alone, he has to be in your lineups, right? I mean, I believe he scored last week. But regardless of whether or not he's scoring, you have, again, a running back that's getting like 25 touches in a game just has to be in your lineup, even against the Jets defense, even against the Jets defensive line, against the Giants offensive line, which may or may not be getting Andrew Thomas back sometime soon. Keep getting reports that he's playing. Oh, never mind. So we'll see about that. So Saquon, not only is he the running back workhorse, he also seems to be the top receiving option on this offense as well. And then the only other thing to even mention on the Giants is Darren Waller, who's been going off recently. Tyrod Taylor's in there, more of a, mobile guy running around when the pressure gets in there, running around when the pressure doesn't get in there for that matter. And he's just throwing it up to Darren Waller. Darren Waller also scored last week. He's been seeing, 7-8 targets and coming down with 6 catches a week. You'll take it, especially in this tight end landscape. So Darren Waller back to being the guy you drafted him for, hopefully in your lineups this week and every week going forward.
Yeah, and 2 more quick things I want to mention. One being Daniel Jones still not practicing. Well, he was limited to practice, but he still hasn't been cleared from his neck injury. Yeah. Now, as a Giants fan, if Daniel Jones returns, and let's say Tyrod Taylor pulls out a miracle win, I don't know how much of a miracle it would be, but let's say he pulls out the win against the Jets. Do you want Tyrod Taylor to be the starting quarterback moving forward, or do you want the Giants to revert to Daniel Jones? Is this one of those situations where, like, what Tyrod has done in the offense only speaks to how good Daniel Jones could be, or is it this is Tyrod, Daniel Jones comes in, he plays like dog shit? Like, what are your thoughts? Like, do you want to keep Tyrod as your starting quarterback?
Well, look, I don't know if I'd say that, oh, look at what Tyrod's doing. Just wait until you see how good Daniel Jones could be. I'm not going to say that, but I do think there's something about, the fact that the Giants offensive line has been injured all year. They've used, 6 or 7 different starting lines now, and they're not good players. They're rotating in and out of there either. And that's Tyrod's game, is he runs around back there, and that's when he's best, when he's out of structure, moving around, making plays happen, and improvising. That's not really Daniel Jones's game. He has that, he has the athleticism and the speed, but it's more, he's just like cool, calm, collected, likes to run around when he's told to, but he's not sitting in that pocket just waiting to move around. So I do think there's something to be said about that, and I think Andrew Thomas's return will help Daniel Jones a lot. And I think that's a long way of saying that I do think this offense is safest and best when Daniel Jones is the quarterback. I don't think Saquon will take much of a hit when he does come back if they put him back into the starting lineup. And I don't really think Darren Waller will take too much of a hit either. I think the beginning of the season was more indicative of how bad this blocking is, more than the Giants' offense is terrible with Daniel Jones.
And they got Justin Pugh back in there straight off the couch, so he's been putting together some decent games. One more player I just want to mention on the Giants side of the football, Jalen Hyatt, played 70% of the snaps the last 2 weeks. He saw one of his most involved weeks last week, coming off season high in targets. He's a potential name to keep in mind moving forward if they continue to involve him in this offense. I mean, these pieces are starting to come together. As you mentioned, if Andrew Thomas comes back, there's a chance we start to see some more of these guys become fantasy relevant. So, Jets side of the football, we already know Breece Hall, running back 1 at this point. He's a workhorse. Garrett Wilson, you're starting him. That's kind of the end of that. Let's try to smooth over some of these. Steelers versus Jaguars. Steelers side of the football, Deontay Johnson did not practice Thursday. He is apparently re-injured and at risk to miss this game. If he does, George Pickens fire him up, wide receiver 1. Outside of that, Najee's been looking a little better lately. Kind of a slower start to the season, but he's starting to get some involved. So thank you, Matt Canada. No, never want to say thank you, Matt Canada. Flip side of the football, Jaguars. Ridley got out-targeted by Jamal Agnew last week. What the hell is happening with Calvin Ridley? I mean, again, we talk. I feel like every week we kind of have this conversation of it looks like Ridley's on the rise. Oh, he fell back down again. Oh, look, buy Ridley up, sell him. Like, at this point, I think you just kind of have to let him ride the bench. He is just, until we start seeing consistency, if we ever do, Christian Kirk is the wide receiver 1 in this offense. So I would just avoid that. Another game here, Titans versus Falcons. Tennessee Titans. Wonder where that came from. Ghost of Kyle is still here. I could feel him. For the Tennessee Titans side of the football, decent matchup for Derrick Henry. Just kind of hoping this isn't one of those weird games where Tyjae Spears comes in and, again, Tyjae Spears ends up getting most of the carries. We also are going to have a split at quarterback between Will Levi and Malik Willis. So that kind of adds to this mixture. You would hope with those players at quarterback that you would want to lean on Derrick Henry a little more. But as Kyle notoriously mentioned, they don't know how to use Henry and they don't know how to run an offense. So not putting my bets on that. But if you have Henry, you're obviously still starting him. I'm just going to be a little weary of DeAndre Hopkins. Again, pretty good matchup, but Falcons defense has actually been creating some turnovers this year. So I just don't know if this situation is going to work out, especially with these two inexperienced quarterbacks coming in. Flip side of the ball, Falcons, Bijan Robinson, notorious headache game. This is going to haunt him for the rest of his career, dude. Oh my God. Missing a game because of a headache. If it was a migraine, I remember, and I mentioned this to a couple of people. I remember Doug Baldwin for the Seahawks. He used to miss games all the time for migraines. I remember seeing the injury report and just seeing Doug Baldwin migraines, and they're not pretty, but it sounds like it was just a headache. I don't know. Are you worried if you were a Bijan Robinson owner going forward? Are you trusting Bijan, or are you? Yeah, okay, you're shaking your head. Yes, tell me about it.
Yep, I trust it. I mentioned in the buy and sells article this week that the internet's sort of freaking out, and I think they're having a little bit of an overreaction based on the Kyle Pitts saga that we've seen unfold over the past few years. I think this is just different. Not only is Desmond Ridder the quarterback, and Marcus Mariota was the quarterback last year, and Ghost of Matt Ryan was the quarterback the year before that, but this team just loves to run the ball. And I mean, we've seen it with Arthur Smith, who's getting, all the hate on Twitter right now. But this is the Arthur Smith revenge game, by the way. I'm kind of interested to see how this one works out. But he just loves running the ball. That's what he did with Derrick Henry when he was calling plays for Tennessee. And that's what he's doing this year. Splitting it with Bijan and Algier, it doesn't matter. Bijan's a top 10 running back to this point, even with the 0.3 points in the headache game last week. So I'm still firing him up. I'm still excited about firing him up. He's my RB1 in a couple of leagues. And I think that if anybody is having any doubts about Bijan's rest of the season outlook, you should just go and trade for him from them at a discount, because I think he's going to be an RB1 going forward.
Yeah, now's the perfect time to take advantage of that. We're going to go on to the Commanders and Eagles. I'll smooth by this one real quick. Brian Robinson, not looking great for his outlook. Chris Rodriguez got a little more involved than a lot of us would like last week. So Brian Robinson got saved by a touchdown last time he played the Eagles. It seems like the Commanders have been trending downwards since their last matchup with the Eagles, especially Sam Howell being sacked more than any other quarterback through 6-7 games, whatever it is. So, Eagles D-line, Hassan Reddick has really come on lately. I think this D-line is going to eat against the Commanders in this one. So, downgrading just about everyone. Terry McLaurin has been on a little bit of an up curve. So, if you have Terry McLaurin, you can start him. Flip side of the football, DeAndre Swift, start. Jalen Hurts, start. A.J. Brown, obviously start. Dallas Goedert, at least lately, start. Devontae Smith, there is some concern because he hasn't been producing. And when you have all these other guys in this offense eating, not everybody gets the same amount of food. So I would still be a little cautious of Devontae Smith in this game. I'm going to lower my expectations just because I don't think this is going to be the last matchup like it was against the Commanders. I think the Eagles are going to get up early and the Eagles are going to knock them out of the park. And if that's the case, they're just not going to want to pass the ball as much. So I'm going to lower my expectations on Devontae Smith. Not necessarily sitting him, but if you're between him and another good option, I'm probably leaning the other way. Skip by a couple more of these. Seahawks versus Browns. Seahawks side of the football, Kenneth Walker did not practice Thursday. We have not gotten the Friday report. We're hoping that Kenneth Walker is practicing today, so he plays in this matchup. If he doesn't, it'll likely be the Charbonnet show. And if it is the Charbonnet show, it's not a great matchup, but I feel like you kind of got to start him. In this one. Receiver-wise, DK Metcalf practice limited. He'll be back for this week, so JSN kind of goes back on the shelf. Brown side of the football, Luke, talk to me quickly about what we can expect with PJ Walker starting at quarterback. Jerome Ford also expected to miss this matchup. Amari Cooper, are you starting Amari Cooper if you have?
No, I'm not too excited about Amari. Not too excited about a lot. I think that it's worth mentioning that the Browns are 2-0 with PJ Walker in there. I was talking to one of my friends about this earlier. This is sort of like the 49ers light, where it doesn't really matter who they're plugging in at quarterback. They're winning games. But no, they haven't been producing with PJ Walker in there. I'm not really excited about starting either of those guys. I'm personally making a very intentional effort to avoid Amari Cooper in one of my leagues. I have Roshan Johnson in there over him, which doesn't seem, too common sense. But yeah, I'm making an intentional effort to avoid Amari Cooper in the league that I have him in. So I do expect this game to be close. I just don't know if it'll be, the shootout offensive type of close.
Yeah, and I guess the intrigue kind of comes from Seattle Seahawks allowing the most points to wide receivers this season, fantasy receivers. So there's that. Next game here, we got the Cardinals versus the Ravens. Kyler Murray practiced in full. So no official word on if he's going to start this week, but he is ready, capable, and he could actually play in his debut this week against the Ravens. In common coach speak, they're not going to announce that, but I'm sure in practice that might have reflected that during the week. So I'm expecting Kyler Murray to start in this matchup. And it's going to be a tough one to start out the season against the Ravens, which have been one of the better, if not the best defense so far this season. If Kyler Murray does play, I'm going to upgrade Marquise Brown a little bit just because we saw last year how much he hyper-targeted Marquise Brown when DeAndre Hopkins wasn't playing. So I would upgrade Marquise Brown. Running back wise, Imari DiMercado came back in and played 80% of the snaps and got like 15 touches after being non-existent the week before. So it seems like we have a running back one in this offense, but I'm not willing to bet on it. They could easily just go in a different direction this week. The one thing I will say is that even in that week where DiMercado was not involved touch-wise, he did still lead the backfield in snaps. So desperate play if that. Ravens side of the football, they don't have Derrick Henry yet. But, Lamar Jackson coming off what was a career game last week. Mark Andrews looking good. Zay Flowers, a weekly must start. Not really too much else to mention. Broncos Chiefs, I think we can smooth by this one. Javonte Williams actually had a pretty good game. How do you assess Javonte Williams going forward? Do you think he's a weekly running back too? Was last week a fluke? Is he actually starting to look better? Because, he was coming off a serious injury. And before that injury, he was considered one of the best runners in the NFL. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I am just not too excited about Javonte going forward. And maybe it's just me just souring on this whole Sean Payton thing. I still can't believe they traded a first-round pick for Sean Payton to do this, which is, have a very bad offense and not win games. But yeah, Javonte scored last week. He looked pretty healthy, but I'd say there's a pretty good chance that Jaleel McLaughlin scores a touchdown this week, or Samaje Perine.
Yeah, it's just one of the situations where they just come in for a play and whoop, it's over. Chiefs side of the football, really not too much else to mention here. We know Mahomes, we know Travis Kelce, we know what that situation brings. Rashee Rice, he's a consistent part of this offense, so you kind of got to start him each week. Moving forward, I'll just cover the last few games here. Luke had a meeting, so we had to cut out, but I'll lead it the rest of the way. 49ers versus Bengals. 49ers side of the football. Christian McCaffrey's back and healthy. Sam Darnold likely starting this week. Receiver-wise, Deebo Samuel still questionable going into this matchup, but Brandon Ayuk is someone that I will be starting. I know we had a little bit of a slower week last week, but he's got all the momentum to keep going. Bengals side of the football, Joe Burrow, T. Higgins. Again, with our conversation with Dr. Nathan, both these guys are expected to be 100% healthy after the bye week. So if you still haven't bought low on this Bengals offense, including Joe Burrow, Joe Mixon, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. Jamar Chase, by the way, leading the league in targets per game. Now is still the time to buy low on this Bengals offense because they're going to explode in the second half of this season. Moving on. Chargers versus Bears. What an exciting Sunday night football matchup. Austin Eckler not looking good. This is a great time for him to have bounce back. You got the Chargers still starting their undrafted free agent at quarterback. He came off a pretty good game against the Raiders. And for that reason, and for how bad the Chargers defense has been, I'm not excited about starting the Chargers defense. So just not kind of trying to move to that direction. I think there's other options for streaming this week, but Austin Eckler, you can trust him. Joshua Palmer seems like you can trust him each week. He's getting consistently involved. Keenan Allen, good chance for a bounce back game. On the Bears side of the football, Luke mentioned Roshan Johnson. Deontay Foreman looked pretty good in the last couple of weeks, but again, last week, kind of a grain of salt against the Raiders team that really just could not do anything with Brian Hoyer at quarterback, and that defense was just pretty lackluster. So Roshan Johnson, he's expected back this week, and if he does play, I think he is going to have a role because even last week, Darrington Evans outsnapped Deontay Foreman. With how good Deontay Foreman was, Darrington Evans came in and still had more snaps. So I think there is a role for Roshan in this offense. And when Roshan Johnson was healthy, Deontay Foreman was inactive. So that's kind of where you got to go there. Last game here, Detroit Lions versus the Las Vegas Raiders. Lions side of the football, Jahmyr Gibbs last week, 20 touches, 87% of the offensive snaps. He is a must start for this Monday night matchup. And that's just kind of the end of that. Again, we saw Deontay Foreman's big game against the Raiders last week. Jahmyr Gibbs can do something similar. Sam Laporta, Amon-Ra, also weekly starts, of course. Raiders side of the football, Jimmy Garoppolo expected back for this matchup. I think if anything, that really just benefits Josh Jacobs, who's fallen off a little bit in the last couple of weeks without him. Hopefully he gets back on track in this game, and I think he does. Receiver wise, kind of a weird tidbit here, but I'm going against Jacoby Myers in like 4 leagues. And there's a habit of when I am going against the same player in multiple leagues, they seem to have career games. So this is not an analysis. This is not a projection. But just know if Jacoby Myers goes off this week, I told you why. Anyway, Devonta Adams, he's still getting targeted a healthy amount. He's been outproduced by Jacoby Myers. So with Jimmy Garoppolo back, I'm hoping that helps him as well. Obviously, you're not sitting him. Michael Mayer, especially with Jimmy Garoppolo back now too, he's still consistently the tight end 1 on this offense. He's been running a ton of routes each week. He's got a high route run participation rate. But Austin Hooper was a little involved. I'm hoping with Jimmy G, I'm not trying to put too much stock into Jimmy G, but with him coming back, I hope that also improves the situation for Michael Mayer as well. I would not call him a start just yet, but he's still on a good trajectory, even after a down week last week. So that's going to do it for this week, week 8. Reminder again, go to Underdog and use code ANALYST. They're going to match your first deposit up to $100. Have fun there, and we'll see you guys next time.